It's always good to be in touch with our roots. This session is about the vocation of the people of God in the Old Testament. Before I begin, I want to touch on a shallower root that's only about 1500 years old. Throughout England, there are many churches with the word Minster in their name. A good example is Beverley Minster in Yorkshire. There are also several cathedrals which have Minster as part of their name too. York Minster is perhaps the best example. The purpose of the Minster in the Celtic Church was as a centre of learning, worship, monastic life and community service. It was a gathering place for people of various vocations to come together and then spread out. Our cathedral here in Fredericton is part of that tradition. As I said in the first of these talks, we often see vocation as the call of God on my life. It can be very individualistic and oriented towards ourselves. In some senses, there's nothing wrong with that. But in the Bible, there's a bigger picture. The first question to ask is, how does the calling that I and others have recognized in me fit in with the overall call of God's people? How am I using that to walk with other people to share the values of the kingdom of God? There's no sense in the Bible that we're called to be lone rangers. We're part of a bigger people. In the Old Testament, perhaps, this is more clearly defined. As we have seen, the Jews are clearly called as the descendants of Abraham to be different and to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. This vocation is reiterated in the time of Moses, as the Jews are led out of Egypt, through the wilderness and into the promised land. Though there is a sense that they are to remain a distinct people, there is never the idea that they should keep God to themselves. Throughout their history, people and tribes who do not belong to them are drawn into their life. Perhaps the most striking example of this is Ruth the Moabite, who was placed into the family line of King David, and thereby Jesus. Throughout the Old Testament, it's clear that the vocation of the Jews centers around several themes. Perhaps the most concise statement of some of the major ones of these is found in Micah 6:8, where the prophet writes, "God has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love mercy, and walk humbly with your God?" Often the question is asked, what is good? God's very clear with the Jews as to what was required of them in this regard. To do justice in the sense of not allowing people to be exploited or left behind. It's not legal justice as we might understand it, but that they all should be treated fairly. This theme runs through the Hebrew scriptures. It's even used to describe how land should be held and for how long. The idea of mercy is also important. It has to do with loving compassion, feeling for the other person and placing their needs ahead of ours. The great figures of the Old Testament often struggled as we do with humility. Yet, this was the calling of the people, to know that they were set apart, not because of anything they had done, but because God chose to do this for the blessing of all the families of the earth. Just as we do, the Jews wrestled with their vocation, but that does not mean that they were freed from the responsibility of following it.